Hey Sunshines, welcome back to Rina Loves Reading, a place dedicated to the books that we're reading, the ones we're adding to your TBR piles, and the ones we are finally getting off. So, this video we are going to be talking about the books that I read basically on my week of vacation. I got 8 done. We're going to be talking about spoilers of all of those books. So, if you are not interested, it's okay. You can click off. But if you are, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let's talk about the books that we read in the last week. So, with being on vacation, I had a lot more time to dedicate to my reading / I was in the car so much over the last week. So, I actually got so many audiobooks done and started books that I didn't think at the end of the week. But let's get into the ones that I read this week or listened to, because that's the real thing. The first book we're going to talk about is blowing up on Book Talk, and I can understand why. It's You've Reached Sam. So this book is the story of a girl following the death of her boyfriend as she moves through the grief process. So in terms of grief, we always hear about like the 7 stages of grief. That actually is not how it plays out in practice, I've found. It's more of like that process as you move through the different emotions and you move back and forth through the emotions. So in this, she is about a few weeks following the death. She's completely shut herself off from the world, which is normal following a tragic death and an unexpected death. And she's beginning to reintroduce herself into society. As she does this, she begins to get phone calls from her deceased boyfriend as he tries to help her move forward with her life without him. It was an interesting premise, and I enjoyed it a lot in terms of that. And it's a quick read. The thing I didn't enjoy about it, I know it's YA, and it's going to be like this, but I felt like the pacing at points was a little bit slow for me, but then it would kick back up and I enjoy it again. I think in terms of how it accurately portrays the grief process, I think at points it got it really well, to show like the mixed emotions that we feel, especially when we're returning to our lives without this person, because grief is so individualized. And you see how like the main characters in the book are still impacted by the death, but those around them are not, because that person was not as important to them. I think having it take place in such a short period of time, I think this entire book is over within like the year following his death, makes sense in terms of that. It accurately reflects sometimes what people go through in that time period, but I think it just needed to be extended more. I think that time frame is a little unrealistic, because it's not even a year. I just remembered, because it happens in her senior year and then she's going off to college. So she's trying to move through the entire grief process in like 3 months, which is really unrealistic now that I think about it, because it's that. And Roman's going to join. This is the second time I have filmed this video, because Roman wants to join and then make a fool and show himself and show his butt off to the world and just be a cat. But I ended up giving this 4 stars because I liked the characters, I liked the struggles that they're going through, and I liked the relationships in it. I took a point off basically just because I think it was a little bit unrealistic, and that might have been unfair to me, but especially for a YA book that's dealing with the grief process, you have to normalize that it's gonna take longer than finishing off your senior year, because the lasting ramifications of grief are a lot longer than that. And I think if I could change anything, I would have given a more realistic expectation for this, because oftentimes teenagers, who are the main audience for this book, are dealing with grief for the first time. If they have grandparents, oftentimes they are getting older and they are potentially passing away. You might be dealing with the first loss of someone closer to your age, especially as you start driving, because the risk of car accidents increases. Suicide during that time frame is at an all-time high in the world. So just that premise, I would have loved it. I would have loved to see it fleshed out a little bit more in terms of that time frame, to show that grief takes time to deal with. It's not just something you get over quickly, which I feel like this had a little bit of elements of that, but it also showed grief for what it realistically was in terms of behaviors. You've got your anger behaviors, you've got your distancing and all of that. The next book I read was a nonfiction. So, Brene Brown, social worker, lover. She's got a lot of good points, and she is very optimistic throughout her books. So I read her most recent book, Atlas of the Heart, and basically this book focuses on exploring what different emotions look like and the wording we choose behind them, because realistically it's true that if you ask people what emotions they feel, oftentimes they'll lump them together in terms of anger, sad, mad. I said anger twice. Happiness, anger, sadness. You get what I mean. But breaking it down into those actual emotions of, hey, am I disappointed? Is that why I'm sad? Am I sad because I'm depressed? Am I sad because I am hurt? Am I angry because I'm frustrated? Or am I embarrassed? Or am I hurt again? I think is an important conversation we need to actually have, because we struggle in this country to identify emotions. We struggle to understand it, and with that, it makes them harder to relate with, I feel, because we are not talking about why we are having these emotions. We're just talking about, I'm mad, so get over it. So I really enjoyed this. I'm a fan of Brene Brown. So the next book, I finally did it. I finally freaking did it. I have owned this book digitally for years, and I never read it. But I finally broke down, and while I was on my way home, I just listened to the audiobook at 3 speed, was done with it in a couple of days, and holy crap, I enjoyed this book so much, because it was that urban fantasy I was looking for, but with a contemporary twist. The romance in it was okay. Again, I liked how you saw the character fall apart because of grief, because I feel like that's an honest representation following the death of basically a large chunk of her friends, and how she overcome that, and the spirals we take, because grief is a messy topic. It is a messy emotion that all of us are going to have to deal with at one point or another. And oftentimes, when you are grieving, you do stupid things that you were not normally going to do, because your world has become so off kilter that it no longer exists. In a blink of an eye, your world has gone from what you expected, especially with a tragic death and an unexpected death, to a completely different world that does not make sense to you, that will never be what you thought you would have or what you envisioned for your life to be. And then following Bryce as she understands her relationship with Hunt, her brother, and the sacrifices those around her are making, and processing that guilt. It's almost like she's processing survivor's guilt throughout this book. Why did I survive? Because I was high on drugs, away from my friends when all of them were slaughtered, and why am I a puppet in this game? And to see her finally something click, and I think this does an actual better representation of grief in terms of like the time frame compared to You Reach Sam, because in You Reach Sam it's only like 3 to 6 months that she's processing all of her grief and moving forward. And this, it has a time jump that it's 2 years following the tragedy. So the beginning of the book is the tragedy happening, and then it time jumps 2 years, which is a more realistic time frame for going through that grief process, I've found. And to see her reactions to people even 2 years later, you sympathize with her. I engaged well with her, and seeing her stand up for herself at the latter part and challenge the archangel and try to protect everyone and the survivors following the loss of her friend, the fire sprite. This was so good. This was so good. Like, the second book, House of Sky and Breath, was not on my TBR pile for this month, but when I was making, my vacation basically I drove to my hometown, which is about 3 hours away. I drove back, drove an hour to go see a BTS concert at a movie theater, drove back, and then drove to the town I went to college in, which is also like 3 hours, and drove back. So in that time frame, I did not want to listen to the radio, but I didn't want to listen to any of the books that were on my TBR pile. So I actually ended up picking up and listening to the second book in the series. And that is actually on the pile of books I'm going to be reading this week and wanting to finish, because I just wanted to continue so much with the story, and I wanted to see where it went, because this left off in an interesting place where everything was having to be reformed, because like the major key authoritative people for the different factions of the supernatural, at least 2 of them died, and how that world is reforming under this major tragedy where like 5,000 people were killed because someone went all cray-cray and opened the gates of hell, basically, and she has to close them. I'm like, where are you going to go from that? Where? Because we just Hunger Games basically 5,000 people and tore them to shreds and left them on the street. Where are we going to go? So I'm like 300 pages into that one. The next book I read, so I finished one of my Book of the Month books. And my deal with Book of the Month is that I have to read to earn my books for the next month through Book of the Month to maintain Book of the Month. I have to read all of the books that I got during that month. So about 3, it's supposed to be 3, but then I wanted 4 books this month, so I might have made another account just to get that 4th book. So this month I have to read 4 Book of the Months. So I got one of them done during this week. So this time next year, it was an okay book. It's basically the story of 2 children are born in the 90s on the exact same time. They're both trying to vie for that first baby born at that hospital in the millennium. And if you got like 50,000 pounds. Or 50,000, pound, because it's a British book. And years later, on their 30th birthday, they come together and don't realize it's them, but it's catching you up through the years of how their lives turned out after that. I liked the dynamic that they had at points, but I found Minnie to be so annoying, because she got so wrapped up on New Year's Eve was jinxed for me because I was not the baby that was born. I got a different name. I got all of that. And that was so annoying to me, because I'm like, you have probably made decisions in your life that have led you to this point, and you have made choices. You were 30 years old, and as a 29-year-old, I'm like, I recognize that I have made poor choices in different points in my life. I recognize the impact that they have, and I recognize the stress that I've caused myself. But at some point, you have to pick yourself up and stop blaming aspects of it. Now, I'm not dismissing if you've had extreme trauma which it did not appear like she did. She did have a strained relationship with her mother because her mom, or how she perceived her relationship to be with her mom, was that her mom didn't care because she was the baby that was born second in the millennia. Yeah. I think that was a little bit unrealistic in terms of that. But yeah, I think I ended up giving it 3 stars because I liked aspects of it. I liked some points of it. I hated the main female character, but I actually liked the male character more, which was weird because it was a romance. Yeah. The next book I finished was my second book of the month, so I only have 2 more book of the months to read in like 2 weeks to earn my book of the month box for next month. Is this close to okay. So I am a Midwestern girl. I love that this book was set in the Midwest. Like, when they were describing the different locations, I could pinpoint where they were putting it because it took place close to where I grew up, so I knew exactly what they were talking about. So that allowed me to connect more deeply to these books, which was cool. I haven't had that a lot because oftentimes, let's face it, books are taking place in different places. But how often are you reading like Midwestern stuff? Not really, because let's face it, Midwest oftentimes bored, unless you're in like one of the major cities in the Midwest. But this was the story of a therapist that stopped basically the main character, the male main character, from jumping off a bridge, and how they progressed through their relationship, which there's a little bit of romance aspect in it, but it was cool to see how that developed and then actually fell apart for me, and how mental health impacts relationships in terms of that. And then going back and seeing how mental health divided them at the end was really cool as well, and how she continued on with her life while he got help. It was also it was tragic at points because you find out that the male main character is lying about who he is to this person because extreme tragedy has taken place, and basically he has lost his family to various forms of death. So I really enjoyed this one, loved it, and it was the second book of the month that I finished this month. So next book I read quickly. I think I read this in like one day because it was just a quick read. It's The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. Basically, sorority of magical witches as they are twisted into, as they progress through college, and then they come up with multiple deaths happening in their sorority. So I really enjoyed this one. I have The Monarchs, which is the second book out in my unread bookshelf, and seeing how this girl that didn't know magic existed coming into the sorority. There's a little bit of a love triangle, which was not the main point of it, but it focused on the sisterhood aspect of the relationships and how stress from outside worlds can impact people was a good theme in this. Because oftentimes college, for me at least, I saw that it became like this bubble where to some extent the outside world does not exist because you are on a college campus. Oftentimes you're secluded because if you don't go to a major city and you don't bring a car, you're basically stuck there. You're living together oftentimes with people, you are eating together, you're going to class together, depending on your field, but people are always around. But that oftentimes takes away from the fact that we all came from different stories, and we all have these outside pressures that led us to college, and the impacts that outside world has on us and the stress we bring into college. So you follow at least one character, the villain in this character, who's, for the right reasons, you can understand why she is making the choices that she is. But at the same time, that doesn't take away from the evil she's doing by killing people. So it's a sympathetic villain, which is always an interesting dynamic for me. Snow is a bad example of it because of the prequel, and most people didn't like the prequel for Hunger Games, but it's kind of snowy in that regard because you understand why this person is taking these steps that they are taking, but at the same time they end up the villains, so at the same time you can't like them and you can't understand their story because they go off and kill people. That's where this one leads me. The last two books I listened to while I was driving to and from as well, but I got two of my Disney books, the two Disney Twisted Tales read this month, this week, and one of them I liked, one of them was okay. So let's talk about the one I liked. So again, these are the Australian covers of the books. That's why they're the not bright, shiny American covers of it. I kind of actually like these better because they're more streamlined and more enjoyable to me in the eye, especially when you put them that way. So the one I liked. So in the Australian covers, it's Let It Go. I think the Australian covers and I think the UK covers follow like the song titles for movies. I think. I'm going to assume so. But in the US edition, this is Conceal Don't Feel. And the thing with these books, which is why I put off reading them for some, because I read like 4 of them, it takes a story, and you know how the story ends in the Disney movies, and you know how it has to end, or it doesn't make sense with the Disney movies, but at the same time, the story doesn't really match with what you expect in the movie. So it's a weird dynamic in that regard because you know how it ends. And you know like the major key points to these stories that they have to hit to get to the end. But that middle stuff, like the sandwich ingredients in this regard, don't make sense. So think of kind of like these books like a triple stack sandwich. You've got the beginning, which kind of makes the sense because you got to start out with the same characters. You've got the middle events, so those turning points, that conflict, that are the same, and then you have the same ending. But the stuff in the middle, completely different. So I enjoyed this one. So Conceal Don't Feel, Let It Go, because I liked the sister bond. So in this book, basically Anna and Elsa don't know the other one exists. They are kept apart because when Elsa hit Anna with power at the beginning of the movie when they were kids, whereas in the movies she just lost her memory from that time period. In the book, Anna would continue to freeze whenever she was around Elsa. So they separated, took her memory. So Anna does not know she is a princess. Elsa does not know she has a sister. Parents die, and then Elsa's magic returns to her. So Elsa also loses her magic in this book until she's about to go into her coronation. Then you have Prince Han that's apparently trying to date Elsa, so that was interesting. But ultimately, the sisters come together, and Anna and Elsa remember each other. You've got Olaf in here, you've got Sven, you've got Kristoff. I just literally blanked on Kristoff's name. But you've got all the characters. It was a good, quick read for me, and I enjoyed how the story twisted because it was similar enough that I knew where it was going, which is the downside to these books at the same time, but at the same time the upside in terms of that. And the last book I read this month, this was an okay one for me, and I think it is because I don't particularly like Snow White's story to begin with, so A Twisted Tale of Snow White's was already gonna face that hurdle. Again, like Conceal Don't Feel / Let It Go, you know the basics of what's going on. This book, for me, picked up a lot at the end because the conflict was happening. Up until then, it was typical Snow White movie. Queen is pissed because Snow White's fair is in the land and she's trying to get rid of Snow White. It was a darker take on it because the evil queen murdered, Snow White's mother. that happened, and she banished Snow White's dad. Yeah, Snow White's dad's still alive in this book as well. So, a little darker in terms of that. So, with that, that's all of the books that I read this week. Let me know your thoughts on these books if you have read any of these books. If you could like, subscribe, and comment down below, it really helps the channel out. I appreciate you, and have a wonderful day.